All right, guys. Welcome to another stream podcast. As you know, I'm Chaos Rain here. Today, I guess I'm going to play an interview done by Mr. Amos Wilson. I think this interview was conducted the end of the 80s, going on the early 90s. I can't pick the exact time per se. If I know the time date, I will say during my commentary. But the purpose for this, because some kind of got to me a little bit when I was watching it. And to be fair and honest, Brother Amos Wilson brought up a very good point that no other person today, maybe adults now that's doing YouTube's streaming, maybe broadcast radio possible, but I would say mostly on YouTube environment, they're talking about this thing about self-sufficiency and all that. But really and truly, do we really know what it takes or what really is necessary, need to be done for the so-called black man of the West to take his rightful place in, I guess, the quest for power instead of a quest on acceptance? And it goes back to, again, what are we doing to prepare our youth for this, what I like to call technical age we're in, where science, technology, engineering, math are now all in one, what they call STEM, and all the things that is necessary component for our self-preservation moving forward in this 21st century. So, like I said, I will be playing and give my own take and commentary. I think this is a good rewatch. This is something that was done decades ago, but I think is important to bring about today. So let me find it. And please, if y'all have any commentary yourself, don't be hesitant. I'll see it in the comment section. So let's begin.
Mr. Wilson, first this question. Why a, quote, psychology of the black child, end quote?
Because in a sentence we can say that psychologists that are currently available for dealing with black children do not really meet the needs of black children, nor black people as a whole. Psychology, like many other disciplines, is based upon the history and experience of a people. The psychology that's available to black people, that is used for teaching black people, for a whole host of things we use psychology for in this culture, is really European psychology and is based upon the European experience. And to try to transfer that psychology to black people, to try to explain the black psyche in terms of a psychology that's not related to the history and experience of black people, is really to misuse that psychology and to mislead black people.
But aren't we all one people, aren't we?
We are to a degree, but I often use a paradox when this kind of question is asked. I say that we are different because we are so much alike. All of us are alike in that we use learning as a means of coping with our environment. And in that sense, black people learn as white people learn, such. So we are the same in that we use the instrument of learning as a coping tool. However, what we learn is what makes our behaviors different. So then we can say, in the long run, in terms of the historical experience of black people, what have black people learned? And looking at that learning experience, we must say then that their behavior is related to that experience. And the thing we recognize immediately is that the black learning experience is not the European learning experience.
What do you mean?
And I sort of like to look at it in terms of individual psychology. For instance, if you did a psychological profile of me, that profile would have to look into my own personal experience, my own personal history. You could not use that profile for yourself. It would not fit you. I could not explain your behavior in terms of my experience as such, because your behavior and your experience, of course, is unique. Therefore, the European experience is a unique experience. The psychology of Europeans is based on that experience, and consequently, it cannot be used for our people. We have to look in the history of African people for the psychology of African people. So then the psychology is, for instance, take educational psychology to a great extent.
All right. Let me do this. See if I can correct that sound a little bit. Let me see if I can correct the sound. Okay. Okay, this should probably fix it. Bear with me, guys. I'm trying to figure something out, do something. All right, well, matter of fact, cancel it because it should be able to correct on its own. So I'm going to continue playing it.
That psychology is built around the white middle-class child. But if you take that psychology and go into the majority of schools in our urban areas, you don't find the white middle-class child there. So you have a teacher who perhaps has been educated in terms of that psychology, running into children or having to deal with a classroom of children. And the child she's been taught to deal with is not even in the classroom to begin with. So, of course, this creates a great disparity in what she's learned, what she has or he expects to go on in the classroom and what actually occurs, which leads to a good deal of confusion. The other aspect of why we need a black psychology involves the fact that Eurocentric psychology is a part of the Eurocentric and European oppressive mechanism. It is one of the major means by which the European has maintained his domination and subjugation.
Oh, I know what to do, guys.
People. It is a psychology that...
All right, I'm going to run it now. This should fix it.
Has developed to a great extent out of the European colonial experience and still carries those roots. And as a matter of fact, even in this day and age, European psychology is used to manipulate black people, to maintain them in a position of subjugation and so forth. So we have to develop a psychology, a black psychology, that must countermand and counteract this kind of influence of Eurocentric psychology.
How is European psychology used to manipulate and dominate black people?
There are any number of ways that it's used. First of all, it's used to maintain an image of black people, both in Europeans themselves and of black people themselves, the so-called famous inferiority complex. To a great extent, Eurocentric psychology has been used to justify basic white prejudices. So the average white person in the racist American society thinks of blacks, let's say, as so-called innately inferior, say, intellectually. Along comes then their psychology with the so-called sheen of being scientific to justify what is already a common myth. So to that extent, it supports a racist system that exists in the society. As a matter of fact, not only does it do that, it provides various number of categories and labels that are used by the layman as well as by professionals to prevent black children in many ways from gaining positive
What are these labels?
things. Many of the labels such as learning disabled, those labels that we hear a lot about nowadays, hyperactivity, reading disabilities, language deficiencies. As a matter of fact, to a great extent, when you are in a university or college and you go to a course that supposedly deals with the minority child, so-called, it really becomes, to a great extent, a course on labels. You say, disadvantaged children, this kind of thing, culturally deprived children. So what happens quite often, the teacher leaves that kind of course with a series of negative labels, so that when that teacher perhaps enters into a classroom, these labels are placed on the children, which lowers her expectation or his expectation about these children, and provides a ready excuse for not teaching. You see, it is.
Okay, we're going to pause here for a second. Now, we all know about all the education systems here in America. Outside America, depending who's teaching it, same thing because of colonial education. As in what Amos said before, that what your children learn is not something to empower them. Even as far as, how can I say it? To keep their subjugation. And as y'all know, this very system that we deal with promotes and teach individualism, which leads to, someone else subjugation and work for somebody else. One of the interesting plights that Black people face in overall is that we don't know what direction we should take it to better and survive this existing environment and the environment that is being restructured as we speak. Yeah, if y'all notice that when we talk about just the issues about the educational part of our children, it has not really been really discussed in detail of what outcomes this education we want for our babies moving forward for survival in the 21st century. I think one of the weakness we face moving forward is we had to ask these serious questions. I think one of the few things Black people could do now is to really be honest of what the outcome of this production of your boys. Are you preparing them for power and to take rightful places of destiny? Or are you preparing for servitude? This is why I call education and servitude. You're educating your youth for servitude. This is the same playbook, like many other schemes, that Black people entirely have not changed. I think one of the few things about servitude is when we're working with each other, we already have a disdainful, not only hate for each other, but we just don't want to work with each other to the point where it's better to work for someone that's not the reflection mirror. And in that direction, that's why you could tell in Africa, there is not really much people working for others per se in Africa per se. Everybody's mostly entrepreneurial in a way, and they're communal because they have a psyche to not really deal or work with someone that looks for them, like them. Give them their money, time, and energy to make somebody else in their own group rich. But they sure as hell will do the opposite for others because it's a perpetual conditioning of the mind. So I think living in the Western world we live in, we are trained for this. We're groomed for this. That's why it's hard when Black people overall said, how can we do things to get better? What we should do. We know what we should be doing, but we refuse to do it. Yeah, I know the quality is somewhat. I'm trying to see if I could fix it in a way. I don't know how to fix it, to be honest with you. The only way I could do it is probably put it in a format. Which, matter of fact, I could probably do that. So let me continue playing as I address this.
This labeling business has left the teacher free now to excuse himself or herself from really teaching because you need media to make an excuse. Well, this child is not learning because it's from a disadvantaged neighborhood or it's from a deprived culture. They have a minimal brain damage or it's hyperactive. And therefore, why bother?
I want to go back into your book a little bit, and we'll leave that and go to some other things. But in your book, you mentioned that many people make the mistake of looking at the black child as a white child that's painted black. Would you expound on that, son, please?
Yes, that's a common mistake that we find. And in fact, it's sort of a myth that's used to justify a lot of so-called civil rights movements and integrationist movements. And it's been sort of a convenient fiction. However, sometimes it works against our own interest. And that is of seeing the black child merely as a colored child. That's a white child except the fact that it has a little different color as such. And underneath the color, everything else is the same. But I object to that because color is not merely just a shade on the body. What your color is represents the history and experience of your people. We are the color we are because of the long evolutionary experience of black people in Africa as a result of black people adjusting to the African continent. It relates also to the concept of genes. You see, what our color, of course, comes from our genes, but we cannot think of genes merely as little chemical packets that color your skin and color your hair and give you a body shape and form. The genes are, in a way, a miniature abstraction of the history and experience of one's people, the cultural experience, as well as the biological experience of one's people. So then what color represents on the surface is really the history and experience of black people. You see, so whatever biological decisions our people made, biological adjustments they made to the African continent and so forth is represented in our bodies.
Okay. In our first series, you talked about psychomotor development and the black child. Would you briefly summarize this area?
This again goes back to what I talk about as the African experience, the African evolutionary experience. Sometimes we overlook some very basic ideas. And one of the basic ideas revolves around the question, when you look at the European climate and the European vegetation and its climatic history, and then you compare that, say, to the African climate history, the African geography and vegetational systems and so forth, you are faced with the issue then, why is it that the black body should be a duplicate of the European body? When, if we look at it from a biological point of view, the nature seeks to adjust a body to its geographical surrounds. And the geographical surrounds of the black man in Africa is quite significantly different from that of the European. So in light of that, we should expect that that body, the African body, should not be a duplicate of the European body as such. So consequently, in order to understand the African body, we must then look at the African evolutionary experience as such. When you look at it that way, then you begin to recognize that there are very significant differences in the rates of development of black, say, and European children. For instance, many of the charts we use in this country and other countries are charts based upon the developmental rates and orientation of Europeans. When we look at the African charts, though, we see rates that are so significantly different until, for instance, after a study of black American children by the American Academy of Pediatrics, it was found that their differences were such, that is, the differences between the development of black children and white children, that a different nutritional chart and a different nutritional approach to black children should be used. For instance, the black child does things on the very first day of birth, such as the ability to hold its head up. If you would pull it up into a sitting position, it is able to actually hold its head up. Black children are able to do this basically, say, 9 hours after being born or on the very first day. The European child reaches this milestone a month and a half later. Black children, for instance, can firmly move their heads about and deal with the environment or maintain a social relationship with their caretaker or with an examiner on the first 2 days after birth. The European child takes about 2 months to reach this point. There are things black children are doing at, say, 7 weeks that the European child reaches some 20 weeks later. It even gets broader than that. For instance, if a black child at 5 months can coordinate himself so that he can, say, take a form out of a form board, it will take the European child some 6 months to get to that kind of, to that same milestone. Or walking the stairs alone, a black child is doing that, many of them at 7 months. The European child then is going to take another 3 or 4 months sometimes to get to that same point. As a matter of fact, some of the developmental scales that are used to measure children's rates of growth includes some 60 different items. And on all 60 of those items, the black child comes out significantly ahead in psychomotor development. And remember, I'm emphasizing psychomotor development here, not just motor development. We're also speaking in terms of those things that are mental as well. So then it would indicate then both on a physical level, as far as the race of body growth and so forth, as well as on a psychological level, the black child is significantly in advance of its European counterpart. To add on another aspect of this, because sometimes the European psychologist concedes this growth and development of the black child. It's put under the caption of motoric advancement or motoric superiority of the black child, as if it has nothing, a little
good athlete.
Yeah, right. It has nothing to do with the mind. But now we are developing a different type of so-called intelligence test that doesn't deal with pencil and paper and is far less so-called culturally oriented. We are now developing tests with the computers wherein we can actually attach electrodes to the brain and challenge that child's, say, vision, hearing in response to things going on in the environment, and get a readout of its brainwave activities as to how it is processing that information, how it is responding to those stimuli that are occurring in the environment. And here we find, and it's interesting at this point to note that Jensen himself notes this in his famous treatise that degraded black people to a good extent, that the brainwave patterns of black children shows a significant advance in terms of maturity over that of white children, which means then that even at birth, not only are they motorically in advance, but in terms of their ability to process information and handle information, they are also in advance. And this is seen too in the earlier accomplishment in the language area. Black children, of course, are talking earlier, as well as walking earlier, as well as established in what we call social relations earlier, and so forth. So you see, this somehow must be related to the African experience of people. And you can see the tremendous damage that can be done if you use, for instance, the white middle-class child as a model for measuring black children, or use what is adequate to meet their nutritional needs as being adequate to meet the needs of black children. And this is why that myth of the black child being a white child colored black becomes ultimately damaging to black children, because you're faced with the issue then, in a sense, in terms of the advancement of black children, using a standard of the European child. May it be possible that we may be retarding the growth and development of that child? When we talk about the readiness of the child to learn, and you look at the European child, may we not be missing out on the readiness of our own children because we're not looking at those children in terms of their actual ancestry and background? So there are many implications.
And I guess all this ties back into the need for a psychology.
Definitely.
The black child.
Definitely. A need, and based on that black experience, because it's in terms of its physiological and psychological growth and development, you are not talking about the same children at all.
I went to a college a couple of days ago.
To pause for a second, let me share y'all something. Let me see if I can find it. What you're seeing here, as I posted this picture image here, is you're seeing the list of books published by Amos Wilson. I'll give you a timestamp. As you can tell up here, 1978 to 2020. That's a period of 42 years. The very first book that he released that's been republished and added up to date is what he's talking about in the first 10 or 7, 8 minutes of this stream is the developmental psychology of the black child. The one right you see right in the middle, on top of Black Power. if you know, the original artwork was something of a child from baby to child to adult. Like, you know, like how they have the evolution of man. Same thing from the original illustration of the cover of the book 40-some years ago. This is an update version of this book for the last, I think, a year and a half, maybe 2. I would say 2 years. 2 or 3 years at most. There's a date when they update this publication. And this is updated by his good friend Servitude. And I think Servitude is from the Caribbean island. So that's what he was explaining here. Mind you, nothing has really changed too much through the data in regards to our children and other races of children for the last 40-something years when he did the research himself and put it in the book. This really is one of his first many publication books that he had to get out when he got his doctorate in psychology, I think, or some behavioral psychology. I'm not sure what his real background is. Y'all could Google it. But the point is this, that this first book was important because it separates our children from them and tells what causes why our children are malnourished, what we're doing wrong in regards to get the adequate health for our children. All this is revealed in the update version of this book, The Development Psychology of a Black Child. So I advise people get this book. It's a very good book.
And it just so happened that I'm serious about this. When I approached the desk, there was a developmental psychology book on that desk. And I looked through that book, and there was nothing on the black child. And then I'm talking about a black institution. Why is that? Why does that exist?
For a number of reasons. One of the reasons, I think, and an overall reason, is that these psychologies, you see, just by the title of them, are called developmental psychology. And that deceives many people into thinking then that this is a psychology that has equal applicability across board. And unfortunately, many black schools and black scholars operate under this illusion. One of the things that we don't, as black people, I think we are not conscious enough of, is how white disciplines, not only psychology, but sociology, all are part and parcel, really a part of the process of maintaining the subjugation of black people. And I don't think we are aware to the degree that we should be, that when we're engaged in standard American education, we are actually engaged in what are called European studies, all white studies. We have a lot of people who went off, in the 60s, and we demanded black studies as if we were demanding something ethnic, as if what had been offered in America and what's being offered in American universities is non-ethnic and objective and across the board. And therefore, the European then doesn't call his courses the psychology of the white child, or the sociology from a European perspective, or white economics, but this is exactly what it is. And therefore you have in many black schools then this idea that simply because it is not overtly labeled white or European, that it is not therefore white or European in origin. And to a great extent, these psychologies are exactly what they should be. In a sense, they are there to maintain the position of Europeans as such. The European, in a sense, protects its own interest by not really talking about the black child in any truthful light and presenting the black child in a different sort of light. The ultimate outcome of studies, even in black schools, ultimately is to maintain the European in a superior position as such.
What do you think would be gained if the black population worldwide were to become more knowledgeable about the black child's psychomotor development, etc.? What would you think the benefit would be?
I think the benefit would be, and that would be not just a benefit, but the many benefits would be, first of all, turning over the world situation as it is today. I think it's basically an insult to the intelligence and to the man and womanhood of black people, and I may say of non-white people, that we have a minority in the world that is dominating that world. We ought to forget that the European is really a minority in the world. It's not a majority. We're so used to in this country of thinking of ourselves as minorities. And we ought to forget that we are part of a very large majority in the world. In fact, I heard someone project that the European segment of the world population would be something like 10% in the 1990s. At this point, I think it's around 20% now, which means that we have then from 10 to 20% of the world population literally ruling over and dominating the other 80%. The other thing...
What's wrong with that?
The other thing, yes.
What's wrong with that?
There are many things wrong with it. Part of the thing is, of course, is the fact that we as non-white people supply these countries with the wealth that are under our lands. And the amazing paradox is, in the sense, that the richer our lands are, our African lands, if you mention even the Asian one, the South American one, the poorer, quite often, the people are who are above them. And then we have this image then of non-white people as being poor, as poverty-stricken, and you have the shame of people literally starving to death while their soils supply the riches and wealth that maintains essentially a resourceless Europe. So just the idea of enjoying more of our own wealth and the wealth of our land is enough to develop a psychology, not only a psychology, but really a whole host of disciplines, a sociology and economics that will reverse this kind of situation where the majority of the world's people that also own the actual majority of the world's natural wealth should benefit from that wealth as such. The other thing is, of course, that we have assumed, unfortunately, that somehow what is European represents normality, represents the way that the world should go. It represents the only way of what we call development. And unfortunately, I don't think we've examined European psychology. Paradoxically, European psychology is not contained in psychology books. It's essentially contained in history. And what do we see?
Say it again, though.
The psychology of Europeans are essentially contained in history, not in psychology books, because it's a psychology that you see acted out on the world stage. And what is the result of that psychology? What is the result of the, say, dominant position of the European in the world? It is bought at a tremendous cost to non-white people. For instance, you can ask the question, is there any country where the Europeans stepped that the local people were not degraded in some sort of way, that the local people were not exploited in some sort of way, that in many instances such as this country or South America where the local populations were not literally and physically destroyed as such? When we look at even, so in the historical sense, you see, we are dealing here with the people in terms of their actions, to me, that are not commendable in terms of what we should be seeking as a people. I look into the future and I see then non-white people coming back on the world stage and ruling that world stage, taking their rightful place in the power relations of the world. Will those non-white people be colored Europeans? Will then they set up a world too that depends upon the degradation of other people and upon the subjugation of other people? Will they too establish a racist ideology? Or will their world be a different one based on a whole different set of principles?
Do you think it will be?
It depends upon what choices we make as people. It depends again upon looking at their psychology, understanding the results of their psychology, critically analyzing the European psyche, then looking at our own and making some very critical choices. If, for instance, though, we choose, as unfortunately has been chosen by many of our people, equality as our goal, this kind of thing that we want to be the same as the European. We don't want to be any different. As a matter of fact, we want to be so much alike, we don't even want people to notice our color. We want to remove the color line and forget that we are black or forget that we are Asian or what have you. Now, then I think about that and said, well, what is this world really like? If we are on the brink now of world suicide, we're in a situation, as I just mentioned, where a small percentage of the world lives fat and well off of a large majority of the world that lives in degradation and so forth. Are we saying that we want to be the same as the European? Are we saying, in a sense, then what we want to do is just multiply what the European already has? We want to share in it. And I think this is a crucial issue for, say, the black American when he makes that kind of statement. Does it mean that we want to join IBM or the other companies so that we can equally exploit Africans and equally exploit third world nations? I don't think when we look at it that we would choose sameness or being just like them. And I don't think once we look at the effects of the European ideologies and psychologies on non-white people that we will choose those as being adequate for our future goals. In fact, I think the choice of equality with whites is a very low-level goal for black people. I think because, of course, when we look at this world today, we're almost on the brink now of where the white man is ready to destroy the whole of the earth, where he seems to be unable to restrain himself.
Okay, you'll have to come back next week for part 2. Mr. Amos Wilson, thank you very much. That's our program. Please join us next week. Good evening. Mr. Wilson, in part.
All right. So far, a lot has been said so far. I want to keep this short because I want to continue on with this because I'm not going to stay on here too long. But it speaks for itself. My thing is this, that black people had to make a decision. And you gotta really be honest. When we talk about integrating, I hear a lot of black people still talk about it because they have a fear of figuring and solving their own problems. Because no other race people is not gonna solve their problems. They will imply and oppose of what you're trying to do. That's a fact. But in regards to solve the bigger issues that plagues black communities as a whole, no, they're not in the business of fixing problems. That's the only sole duty of black people. Mostly men. But, you know, when you was a human being or a race of people, when you're more powerful is when you reach that stage when you're able to solve challenging problems. Not just minute problems, but challenging problems. But let's continue on because I'm not going to stay on here long. There's still more to this.
One, you said that the black man's, the black woman's goal of equality with the white man is a low goal. Would you expound on that simply?
Particularly when equality is equated with sameness. The idea of being equal as being almost non-distinguishable from the whites or the so-called European. Because when I look at the kind of world that the European has made, I see equally sharing that world with him or expanding it and not changing it as to a degree, meaning equally spreading the misery that's current at this point. We see, for instance, we look at European leadership today, we see European leadership, for instance, that's incapable or seemingly incapable of maintaining peace, that seems to be almost definitely headed for a third world war. A European system wherein you have enough weaponry now to destroy the earth and to kill people, what would we say, several times over, as if people could die more than once. A leadership that has polluted the world and threatens to destroy the ecosystem of the world. A leadership that still maintains vast amounts of discrimination and exploitation of other people as such. I then cannot see that sharing that kind of world with them as a goal for black people. As a matter of fact, we must bring a world that is superior to the current one, and I think black people, as well as other people, should be concerned about bringing onto the world stage a civilization that is superior to the ones that the Europeans have set here, or else we would just rush it further into the destructive direction in which it's going. We see a European society now, for instance, that is confused in terms of its values. Not only then are black people suffering in a sense.
Why do you say it's confused?
Well, we look at the American system today, where religion, for instance, no longer has much authority in the direction of people's lives, and apparently the law is having less and less direction in people's lives, to such a degree that everybody's sort of gotten into the me generation business, as if we're going to only be able to survive and maintain ourselves in this world by contemplating our navels or getting into ourselves or getting into self-awareness, as if the maintenance of orderly, productive human relations is not important, you see. And yet we cannot each do our own thing totally as such. That leads to chaos as well. But this kind of me orientation that we...
Did you say chaos, Dr. Wilson? Yes, it is. Because chaos, without an extreme or a greater chaos, the order will never be restored in the way we live it today. Just a side note.
And this type of narcissism that is quite apparent in this country as well as other European countries, you see, to me, indicates a situation where people now have lost a sense of direction, as well as this inability to say, for instance, stop going in a direction that is obviously self-destructive. You got a situation here, for instance, in the United States, where you have enough weaponry to destroy, and yet the military budget grows and grows by leaps and bounds, and the same thing with the Russian situation.
In connection with that, you said something earlier before the program. You talked about what you perceive to be the real purpose of a neutron bomb. We want to get back to the black child thing, but would you touch on that, please?
Yes, it sort of goes over an area I think that we as blacks should discuss more and more. While civil rights is, of course, very important to us and is a central issue in our lives, I think by stressing it, we have sort of overlooked many of the other things that are going on in the world. Of course, this has been in part built by our culture, too, in the sense that whites sort of only invite blacks to programs, other things, when civil rights seems to be the thing to be talked about. We are often misled by the media. As a matter of fact, the media is used to hypnotize black people and to maintain black people in a state of hypnosis. And it does this by deceiving them and by focusing their attention in non-essential areas. For instance, my reading of the so-called neutron bomb, this bomb that supposedly leaves things standing, I think the projection of the American news establishment has been that this bomb was essentially developed to deal with the Russians, particularly to deal with Western Europe in defense as against the Eastern European armies attacking them. But I think another aspect that has been overlooked was the aspect that the bomb was essentially developed to deal with third world nations. For instance, to bomb the Mideast and leave the oil wells standing. And not too much to stress the imagination to see the bombing of African peoples and leaving the resources available for exploitation as such. And I think we as a people should think about these possibilities. And we should look beyond media programs that seek to focus our interest in another direction completely to our own disadvantage. For instance, I think if we look at the so-called Columbia program, the Columbia space craft, we get, again, the news media gives us this hype, about whether they'll get up and come down safely and so forth. But the actual military implications of that for third world peoples and the implications of how that helps to maintain the domination of the European over us, of course, is not looked into. How is that system being used, for instance, to put up military satellites and to develop laser weapons and other things that will be used, for instance, to blackmail third world nations. But beside that, how is it used in the communications network so that nations and African nations, for instance, and other nations of the world will be flooded by English-oriented programs, European-oriented programs, again, maintaining the European position and educating our people in the European position.
Is it any accident that no black man has gone to the moon, etc.?
Certainly. I don't think it's an accident. Of course, I think it's just a further extension of keeping black people or non-white people out of very important programs as well. However, I think other than blacks getting into these programs, which I think is a laudable goal to a degree, of course, we may be about developing our own. I think this is one of our major problems in that we as people do not think about doing these kinds of things on our own. I'd like to see, say, those ships taking off from the continent of Africa, run by Africans as such. But we as black people have to begin to imagine that being the case.
And black men have helped to develop this country's space program.
Definitely. The unfortunate part about it is we don't transfer a lot of the knowledge that we've gained from working with this country to our own people.
And to Dr. Wilson, you know, reason why you're never going to see this until maybe black people, men in particular, are pushed in the brinks of against the wall when there is scarcity. Extreme scarcity. Only then you will see something created out of nothing. Or we like to call the death and resurrection effect, where you in the ground, you die, but you come out and sprout and you're alive. Birth. That's why you have not seen majority of our people. We go to these institutions, schools. We take and get these trades. We learn as much as we can. But it does not, or we do not apply for our own self-preservation. And we have the capability to do this. Remember, the mind, what you do to this brain, your thinking, how you conduct this, is going to determine what status of being you're going to be physically. So keep that in mind.
I think this is the crucial position of black men and black women in this country, is to transfer knowledge and information gained to our own African countries and our own people of color, the world over, for defensive purposes as well as possibly for offensive ones or for entering into other worlds as such.
Okay.
The other thing is, you see, I don't think it would be enough, for instance, for a black child merely to dream of being on the spaceship with white astronauts, or to dream of being a part of the program. For to me, that helps maintain the servant mentality that is too prevalent in the black community. We are just an extra, or we're taken along as an extra as such. I'm looking forward to black men being the masters of space, let us say, being in control of space, let us say. So it won't be enough to just ride along and be along. We must have our own space program. We must explore our moons and the other sides of the world, because it is only out of mastery and the desire for mastery and what may be a very bad word, the desire for power, that mental growth takes place, you see. To opt for equality, as we've done too much, does not put enough emphasis on mastery of ourselves and our destiny and so forth.
You said in a previous conversation that there's a difference when you see a child who's going to school to master something, as opposed to become a master, that is, as opposed to becoming a servant. What is the difference in the child?
The major difference is on how he interacts with the information that is being developed in the classroom, and how he perceives that information and how he's going to use that information. To a good extent, a person who's not headed for mastery, let us say, essentially is interested in learning what as against how, you see. And to a great extent, then, his approach to knowledge is passive. And he's more or less, he becomes more interested in memorizing and remembering what is told him. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's more or less, he becomes more interested in memorizing and remembering what is told him. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders, and how he's going to use that information. To a good extent, a person who's not headed for mastery, let us say, essentially is interested in learning what as against how, you see. And to a great extent, then, his approach to knowledge is passive. And he's more or less, he becomes more interested in memorizing and remembering what is told him. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders.
That's what a Eurocentric education does for the African mind, for black people. From the 20th century on to the 21st century. And we can go out even further to, depending on how much black people will be in numbers existing, the 22nd century. And like always, what is this quest of mastery? Brother Amos said, that means you must master all elements, even oneself. But like I said, any education we go or we receive or we try to learn, we always have to ask these potent questions. Because down the line, it's going to be a point where you're going to be learning to take orders instead of to give orders. See how it works? You're going to be more trained to learn to take orders than to give orders. Yeah. I had to play that multiple times so that it's stick in your heads.
You see, and to a great extent, many of our so-called educated blacks, our very highly educated blacks, have still been educated in that mode. So you go to, and unfortunately, many of us go to school to get a job, for instance. We don't perceive it as a part of a massive effort to attain control and mastery of our situation, and ultimately to outdo the European. You see, one of the major problems we have as a people is, and one of the major functions, let us say, of Eurocentric psychology and sociology and history and so forth, has been to convince non-white people of the invincibility of white people, to convince us that the white man is not capable of being defeated, that he cannot assume his minority position in the world as he is. This being the case then, and it has made us then think, well, we have to accommodate him. We have to get along with him. No, he's going to, we have to live with him because they are in control and so forth. Well, that leads to a type of attitude toward learning that means that you're not going to try to outlearn him, outthink him, outmaneuver him, you see. So if you're going for mastery, you see, then the knowledge becomes very important, and you see it as a tool for advancing your own power interests in the world. If you're not going for mastery, you just see it as a means of being able to carry out efficiently the orders that are handed down. It also limits creativity, because if we are to defeat the European, if we are to master this earth and take back this earth from the European, then we must outthink the European. We must then be creative. That puts the learning emphasis on the how-ness, the how to think as such, and to the use of knowledge as a tool of mastery. It's a very different kind of thing. Very different emphasis there.
Let me ask you this.
This is part 1. Title. Educating for Servitude. Be on the lookout for part 2 to conclude this split or half and half part of this, discussion, or I like to call it my breakdown of it currently. If you missed what you heard earlier, please go back to this replay of this stream or podcast, and take notes for yourself. Also, please leave a comment on what you feel about this first part. He has said a lot. I haven't really gone and said much to this. I let it play for itself. But at the end of the day, you got to make a choice as race of people. Are you going to be masters of your destiny, take your power, or are you going to be slaves of servitude to others? There is no in between to the two. So, like always, be on the lookout for part 2. So take care. Let the chaos reign.